This documentary is an attempt to understand the causes and consequences of the events in Latvia that led to the tragic, high-profile murder of Insolvency Administrator Martin Bunkus. The filmmakers offer their sincere condolences to the family of the deceased and hope that this film, made from publicly available material, will help identify the real motives and reasons, as well as the real customers and beneficiaries of this audacious murder. The family of the lawyer who was shot is very skeptical about the investigators' ability to solve the case.
Bunkus was shot at with an automatic weapon. Aldis Gobsams, a well-known Latvian lawyer, appeared with the version how employees of various state institutions helped the shot Martins Bunkus to realize illegal transactions through the insolvency process of Rego Trade LLC. Bunkus not only transferred himself $150,000 from Rego Trade's account in 2015, but also nearly $14,000 more from the offshore company Portanura Commerce LLP. Everyone knows about the so-called golden triangle of Jurašs, Černieckis, and Bunkus. The scheme was very simple. For example, you have a bill for $800,000, and you are offered to solve the problem for $100,000, and it gets solved.
Anonymous explained that Dace Bunkus warned him not to mess with her, because her sons are lawyers, and some are working for the State Revenue Service too.
Bunkus's declaration shows his income has increased sevenfold to almost €1.5 million. Martin Bunkus had materials in his possession that contained information about ABLV Bank's possible involvement in money laundering in substantial amounts over a long period of time. TV program Neka Personiga shows that in the last months before his death, Bunkus's efforts had only one focus: to prevent the self-liquidation of the ABLV Bank, lobbied for by its shareholders, and to hand the process over to outside liquidators. 13 days after the death of Martin Bunkus, technically the fastest time in which it could actually have been prepared, ABLV shareholders received their favorable decision to liquidate the bank. It was the successful looting of Trasta Komercbanka that further inspired the Latvian insolvency mafia to its next feat, the attack on ABLV Bank, which failed only because the plan was exposed.
At the end of November, entrepreneur Andris Boyars disappeared. We found out that Bunkus and Boyars were facing the same insolvency proceedings. If Boyars and Bunkus, indeed, left the Russian entrepreneur with nothing, the disappearance and the murder may be connected. The German tabloid Bild published an article that casts a shadow over Latvia's reputation. The former head of the German Federal Intelligence Service, August Hanning, and former NATO chief, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, were victims of an alleged bank robbery organized by the state. As a result, Rasmussen and Hanning, former members of the supervisory board of PNB Bank, formerly Norvik Bank, faced multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Both thought they were in a normal EU state of Latvia, where banking law and EU laws apply, but both have found themselves in a mafia crime spree. Both are being forced to pay the bill for a state-sanctioned bank robbery. Hanning makes serious accusations in a letter to the German embassy in Riga. I have information that the central bank was induced not to intervene by bribing the Latvian justice minister and the chairman of the legal committee. The bank is said to have paid them both a sum of €500,000. Not only Hanning wrote an angry letter, but also the former head of NATO, Rasmussen, to the head of the Latvian government. The article goes on to say that Rasmussen-Hanning's case is not unusual for Latvia. Latvia is an arena of dark machinations and one of the most important money laundering places for Russian oligarchs, mobsters, politicians, and secret services. This is where money from dark Russian channels has been flowing into the EU banking system for 30 years. This is where North Korea launders and, most importantly, hides billions. In 2016, Trasta Komercbanka had to be closed. The money of rich Russians were passing through it. No wonder, in Latvia, more than 50% of all bank deposits came from abroad. And the head of the central bank and other supervisory bodies continued to ignore this. The article also mentions Martin Bunkus in the context that time and again, criminal bankers and corrupt state controllers are exposed. And those who know too much and no longer want to play along, die.
After the murder of Administrator Martin Bunkus, the safes he used at SEB Bank and ABLV Bank were emptied, writes EAR magazine, citing information from sources. Both safes were registered in the name of Bunkus's grandmother, but were used by her grandson. The elderly woman, who has limited legal capacity, took the contents of the safe, several bags and a large money box with various bills, shortly after the murder, even though she had never visited the safe before. The deceased's mother, Dutse Bunkusa, believes that these actions were carried out with the knowledge of Martin's brother, Kaspars Bunkus, and her ex-husband, Ojārs Bunkus. According to Dutse Bunkusa, who informed law enforcement authorities in July of this year, Martins Bunkus had kept important documents and money in a safe deposit box at a SEB bank, the contents of which were emptied the day after the murder. The mother admitted that this had prevented the police from obtaining information about the large amounts of cash that Bunkus had kept, and that the investigators had not acquired potentially valuable leads in the investigation of his murder, information and documents that the deceased or other persons would not have wanted in the hands of the police. Dutse Bunkusa is therefore now raising the alarm about possibly illegal actions by family members in obstructing the murder investigation, the magazine writes. In the last years of his life, Bunkus was involved in the liquidation of the Trasta Commerzbank, TKB, officially earning more than €1 million. The police have so far not identified which of the murder investigations might be the right one, but the victim's mother has drawn the attention of law enforcement to the liquidation process of TKB, and in this context, mentions Martin's elder brother Kaspars. It is undeservedly overlooked that Kaspars Bunkus also plays a very important role in this case and has a huge influence on the administrator of TKB, Armins Rasa, including the fact that after the death of Martins Bunkus, Armins Rasa has made very large payments to companies related to Kaspars Bunkus, the mother said in her letter to law enforcement authorities. The publication estimated that the administrator's fees in this process are not small. 30% of the recovered funds are paid to the administrator and his assistant, as decided at the bank's creditors meeting in November 2017. Information gathered by Earth magazine from the monthly accounts of the insolvent bank shows that in 2018, a total of €1.12 million was paid to administrator Rasa and his assistant, €1.38 million in 2019 and €1.24 million in the first half of this year. If we assume that the remuneration of TKB's administrator published in the Latvijas Vēstnesis is stated in full, including tax, then it appears that Rasa has given more than 70% of the total remuneration of TKB to some undisclosed assistants, almost €1.5 million during those 2 years, writes EAR.
Insolvency administrator Martins Bunkus withdrew 2 auctions planned for Wednesday, the day before the murder, in which he planned to sell claims of about €400,000 against former managers of Rago Trade Ltd that he administered. Bunkus has been the administrator of a total of 48 companies during his career, but now his only active insolvency proceedings are against Rago Trade, according to information from the Firmas LV database. The food wholesaler Rago Trade was declared insolvent in the spring of 2008. Bunkus stated that former members of the company's board Mikhail Ullman, Alexander Budovsky and Dan Vopna had squandered the company's assets before the declaration of insolvency, so he filed legal suits for recovery of funds against them. The Supreme Court in 2012 granted Bunkus's claim and recovered €265,626 lats, that's almost €378,000, from Ullman in favor of the company. There are also claims against Budovsky for €192,055 and against Vopna for €204,145. Bunkus had planned to put both of these debts up for auction on May 30th, but he withdrew it on May 29th. Several years ago, Pediac Portal wrote about the conflict between Bunkus as administrator of Rago Trade and Ullman. The businessman complained that the State Revenue Service, which is Rago Trade's largest creditor, was represented by subordinates of Martins Bunkus's brother, Kaspar Bunkus, head of the insolvency proceedings at the SRS Tax Administration. At creditor meetings, they supported the interests of the administrator, not the state, Ullman argued.
Reacting to various accusations against the insolvency administration system following the murder of insolvency administrator Martins Bunkus, the Ministry of Justice summarized various evaluations by foreign experts on the reform of the supervision of the insolvency process. The evaluations indicate that the path of reforms is well chosen, but there is still a lot of work to be done and the work that has been started must be continued. At the same time, some individuals make loud claims that specific people in political circles are behind everything. The European Commission noted in a 2018 report that the Latvian government has strengthened oversight of insolvency administrators, introducing tighter controls, stricter rules on conflicts of interest, and harsher penalties for official misconduct. The EU Council commented positively on Latvia's government reform program, stating that the regulation of insolvency processes has improved markedly in recent years, limiting opportunities for abuse. In addition, the Foreign Investors Council has also expressed several times that the situation has improved noticeably in the last 5 years, which is explained by the active work of officials and law enforcement agencies. 5 years ago we started from a deep pit, there were various gangs, people were really intimidated, and ordinary entrepreneurs and often even law enforcement officials were not able to fight these gangs. But now there have been positive changes, especially over the past year, said Ilzais Notiņā. From May 14th to 18th, experts of the International Monetary Fund visited Latvia. Their initial opinion shows that the chosen path is the right one. They believe that the reforms that have been started should be continued in the chosen direction. At the same time, some politicians expressed a certain amount of criticism towards the insolvency sector. Thus, Aldis Gobsam stated, "Signs of classic organized crime prevail in this industry. Everyone close to the industry has known for a long time, for many years, which people are involved. It's not just administrators. These are specific politicians. These are specific, all too familiar members of the institutions of security, justice, taxes, and oversight. All of these faces can be called by their names."
The murder of insolvency administrator Martins Bunkus is a warning and a challenge for both the internal affairs system and insolvency policy implementers, says criminologist Andris Vilks. The murder was committed in a blatant, Western style. The perpetrators chose broad daylight, a public place close to the National Police and the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Although, as professionals, they could have done it inconspicuously. According to Vilks, such murders are rare in Latvia, but they do happen. For example, the murder of Judge Jānis Laukroze, 16 years ago, remains unsolved. Laukroze was killed with several shots in the yard of his house on Lechplesha Street in Riga. The means used in the 90s have not disappeared and are being used again. If the organizers of the murder chose this pattern of behavior, they were forced by circumstances, said the criminologist. According to Vilks, the murdered party has not fulfilled any of the obligations stipulated in the contract. It is possible that the damage was extensive. Other motives are unlikely.
The issue of the self-liquidation of ABLV Bank has become relevant lately. According to TV net sources, one of the most probable versions of the murder is related specifically to the permission and disapproval of the liquidation of ABLV Bank. This issue was directly related to the interests of Bunkus. In theory, the liquidators of ABLV Bank have the possibility of access to 400 million euros. Bunkus was number 2 on the list of candidates for the liquidator of the credit institution. According to the police version, Bunkus's death was connected with his professional activity. It also affected Thursday's parliamentary session, which discussed a new regulation to reduce the risk of insolvency fraud. At one time, Bunkus also donated 6,000 euros to New Time and Unity political parties. In addition, he was the administrator of the enterprise of Solvita Aboltiņā's husband, Jānis, IV Motors. The party denies that he contributed in any way to Bunkus's interests. It also became known that insolvency administrator Martins Bunkus might have previously manipulated the information at his disposal in the insolvency case of Rago Trade Ltd in order to get 721,186 euros recovered from 3 former board members of this company, Mikhail Oman, Alexander Budovsky and Dan Vopne. This stems from the Supreme Court's May 24 decision, which stated that there may be an impermissible situation in which an administrator makes a claim against third parties by manipulating the information in his possession about the documents he received while performing his lawful tasks, and the existence of which probably excludes the responsibility of these board members. The Supreme Court points out that such actions by the administrator should be considered a gross violation of the second part of Section 26 of the Insolvency Law, which requires the administrator to provide a legitimate insolvency process. In its cynicism and audacity, it is the worst crime of the year. This is what Prosecutor General Eriks Kalnmeyers told us about the murder of lawyer Martins Bunkus, who was assassinated in his car on the morning of May 30th.
An audacious attack in broad daylight in the middle of live traffic clearly conveyed a message, but the police investigation into this murder currently has no significant new findings. The connection of the crime with the professional as well as the private life of the lawyer is being examined as a version.
We have information in our possession that indicates that Bunkus, 3 months before the tragic event, tried to use all possible means to get the position of the liquidator of ABLV Bank. Bunkus met with U.S. diplomats and lobbyists, invested considerable financial resources and even set up an international team of liquidators.
In his 16 years of legal practice, Bunkus has also had experience in 70 insolvency cases, the most well-known of which was the liquidation of Trasta Commerzbank, which made him a good profit in 2017. At the beginning of 2018, Latvia's third-largest bank unexpectedly found itself on the brink of liquidation. On February 13, the U.S. authority FinCEN announced that ABLV was guilty of systematic money laundering, corruption and violation of sanctions against North Korea and should be excluded from the U.S. financial system. Shortly after the report, ABLV was forced to close down. The banking regulator had to decide whether ABLV would self-liquidate, with liquidators and auditors chosen by the bank, or whether it would be liquidated and its portfolio, worth $2 billion, would be shared by outside professionals. Nika Personiga has obtained materials which show that 3 months before his death, Martinj Bunkus invested heavily and tried to use the influence of U.S. diplomats and lobbyists to be appointed as ABLV's liquidator. On February 27, Bunkus flew to Washington to meet David Merkel, former U.S. government and White House spokesman, at the Jefferson Hotel. Mr. Merkel was one of the highest-paid staff members in the George W. Bush administration, holding senior positions in the Treasury and the National Security Council. Nika Personiga has unofficially learned that Merkel was hired by Bunkus in order to secure the support of the U.S. authorities for Bunkus to become liquidator of ABLV. Bunkus paid Merkel tens of thousands of dollars for the job. The two met in Washington and Riga and corresponded intensively.
Dear David, with reference to our conversation on Saturday and our previous conversations, I would like to formulate the following terms of reference. 1. We must do everything possible to prevent the process of self-liquidation. As we discussed, the liquidation should be carried out by external and independent liquidators who are not linked to the bank's shareholders, who would use the self-liquidation to their advantage in order to hide their illegal activities. They will not cooperate with the official supervisory authorities and will act only in their own interests and in the interests of creditors closely linked to them. This situation is unacceptable, illegal, and against the principles of liquidation. 2. It is necessary to ensure that the liquidators appointed are professional, honest, and loyal to the Latvian state and its allies. These liquidators could cooperate with the relevant state authorities. The choice of liquidators is the exclusive competence of the Financial and Capital Market Commission, FCMC. It is therefore very important that the FCMC knows who these honest and trustworthy liquidators are. This is why it is important for the FCMC to hear from FinCEN or another authoritative body about possible candidates for a liquidator for a given credit institution. In this way, it would be possible to continue the ongoing cleanup of the financial sector, which is being carried out in close cooperation with the Latvian state, FinCEN, and the FCMC. Are these objectives achievable? I would like to hear your views and action plan to reach these goals. Greetings Martinj, thank you for this email. Everything is clear to me and I am already working in this direction in Riga and Washington. I understood everything. David.
It had been a month and a half since the collapse of ABLV and May had arrived, but the FCMC was still delaying its final decision. From the emails, it seems that Bunkus received secret information that the FCMC would prefer ABLV to self-liquidate, which put a damper on Bunkus's plans.
I had a meeting that we discussed in Washington. And I appreciate the document and I will pass it on. Let me know if there are any possible times when we can call or meet at the end of May or the beginning of June in Riga, if you are there at that time. David.
The document discussed in the correspondence was drafted on April 26. It sets out an international team headed by Bunkus for a possible liquidation of the bank that may be coming soon. Together with Bunkus, the team would include another law firm, LX Kleovinch, with lawyers Ryman Slidinch and Phillips Kleovinch, as well as the international audit firm PricewaterhouseCoopers. The document mentions that he has already reached an agreement with both of them. The law firm said this week that no such agreement had been signed. The audit firm confirmed that there were indeed plans for such cooperation. We are informed that Bunkus has also met with the U.S. Embassy in Riga to discuss the liquidation of ABLV. The U.S. Embassy in Riga told us that it does not comment on the content of diplomatic meetings and can neither confirm nor deny whether these specific meetings took place. 13 days after Bunkus was shot dead in his car on a weekday morning, the FCMC decided on ABLV's own liquidation, the most favorable scenario for the bank's shareholders. We did not have a telephone conversation with Mr. Merkel. At first, he denied that he had provided services to Bunkus. Later he questioned whether the caller was a journalist. After sending written questions, Merkel sent a brief reply.
My work has been dedicated to making the banking system in Latvia more transparent. I have not been asked any questions by law enforcement authorities and I do not expect them. Martin's death is a tragedy. Greetings, David Merkel. In the next episode, exclusive interviews with shocking facts, deepfake techniques for proof of guilt, fabrication of charges and leaking them to the media, to kill for 400 million euros. End of episode 2. To be continued.